She walked down the streets of the city, hiding behind the backs of passers-by. For the first time in her life, a grown married woman, she was following someone. And that person was her husband, Andrew. Could her colleague, Victoria, be right? Victoria, who lived nearby, had told her she'd seen Andrew in a restaurant a couple of times with a beautiful, long-legged, stylish blonde. The pair had been talking animatedly, and the woman had occasionally given Andrew's shoulder a reassuring pat. "You must have been mistaken," Chloe had said confidently. She and Andrew had always had a close, trusting relationship. They shared their joys and worries and talked about their day. No, Victoria must have been wrong. She'd only seen him a couple of times. She'd probably confused him with someone else. Victoria had always been skeptical of Chloe and Andrew's marriage. She'd watched them meet and had been certain it had no future. "My dear, I wouldn't get my hopes up too soon, so you don't get disappointed later. We've been there, and it hurts." Chloe understood there was a grain of truth in her friend's words, but with Andrew, she felt so loved and safe. He looked at her with love and tenderness, protected her, and tried to make her happy. It couldn't be a lie. "It's not a lie," the worldly Victoria had insisted. "Right now, he really does think you're the woman for him. It's hormones, the honeymoon period, all that, but time will pass, he'll see things soberly, and he'll realize." Chloe knew her friend might be right. Andrew was just so perfect. He was handsome, with striking turquoise eyes against his tanned skin, and dimples that appeared when he smiled. Chloe could watch his smile forever. She'd never felt this way about anyone before. Andrew was a leading engineer at a major oil company, with nearly 100 people under him. He was smart, driven, and ambitious, a graduate of a prestigious university in London. They had tried to convince him to stay in the capital, but he didn't want to leave his hometown. His parents were quite elderly, and Andrew was their only and very late child. He couldn't leave them alone, so he returned home. By his own account, he'd never regretted it. His parents were wealthy people. His father, Arthur, had been a major local businessman who owned a profitable dairy, and before that, he'd been in the restaurant business in London. But after his son was born, he decided to change his profession, and the family moved from the capital to a quiet provincial town with good infrastructure but a much better environment. "I always thought it was better to raise children in a small town," Andrew's mother Eleanor had said when recounting the move. Against all silly stereotypes, Chloe had a perfect relationship with her in-laws. In a way, they replaced her own parents, though they were closer in age to her grandparents. Chloe's own parents had died when she was just 5. They had gone foraging in a forest and got lost. They were never found. The forest was an unpredictable and dangerous place. Little Chloe was taken in by her paternal grandmother, who tried to give her everything she needed. Chloe adored her gran, but when she was just 20, her only relative passed away. It was her heart, it was her age. Chloe was completely alone. She craved love, support, and a close companion. That's probably why she got together with Mark. At first, he seemed like the peak of perfection. When the tragedy happened, she was in her 3rd year of university, studying economics. She had gotten into university thanks to her grandmother, who had always told her to study hard and strive for a better life. In Chloe's opinion, her little family had not been poor. At least, they never went hungry. But her gran always lamented that she couldn't take her granddaughter on trips to show her big cities or other countries. "What are your years for? You'll have time for all that," her grandmother would say. Chloe didn't understand. What was so interesting about traveling? Yes, her grandmother's stories were captivating, but why be sad about not having money for trips? You could just watch it all on TV. But later, when Andrew showed Chloe the world, she finally understood what her grandmother had meant. It was just a shame she could never share the experience with her. Andrew was the best gift fate had given Chloe. He had literally changed her life and her worldview. With him, she always felt at peace. They had been together for so long, and nothing had changed. The same tenderness, the same adoration. They had become family to each other, and their daily routine hadn't worn them down as many people warned. Andrew still looked at her with love and still tried to surprise her and make her happy. The prophecies of acquaintances about the lack of future in their relationship, including Victoria's, had not come true. Or had they? Maybe Chloe would find out now. Why was he out here at this hour? Andrew was supposed to be at home, looking after their sick son. What was he doing here? Perhaps he was rushing to meet that beautiful blonde Victoria had talked about? Chloe would find out now. Her heart was pounding, and her head was starting to ache. She was used to trusting her husband completely, and now, following him, she felt a mixture of conflicting emotions: anxiety, shame, guilt, and a little bit of everything else all at once. Chloe didn't understand why her husband was in the city center right now. She knew he was supposed to be at home, looking after little Theo. One of their twin boys had fallen ill and hadn't gone to nursery today. Chloe couldn't take time off work. She had a mountain of reports and an inspection to deal with. But Andrew, he could work from home today, which was exactly what he was supposed to be doing. He was supposed to be working and looking after their son, but for some reason, he was here, hurrying down a wide street, and Chloe was following him to finally uncover his secret. If it was something for work, Andrew would have called his wife to let her know who was looking after Theo. The little boy was only 3. He couldn't be left alone, especially with a high temperature since the morning. No, Andrew was a caring, attentive father. He adored his children and would never leave them in danger. Someone must be with Theo, maybe a nanny or his mother Eleanor. But why didn't Chloe know about this? And why was Andrew here in the city center? His office was about 10 kilometers from here, and Andrew looked strange. He always went to work in trousers and a shirt. There was a strict dress code. But now, Andrew was in jeans and a polo shirt. Chloe didn't remember those clothes in his wardrobe. Either they were new or they were old and forgotten. It was strange. Andrew had never liked jeans and polo shirts. He preferred different, less vibrant colors. But now he was wearing an orange polo. It confused her even more. Chloe followed her husband closely, noticing every new strange detail. His worn-out trainers of an unknown brand. Strange. Her husband preferred well-known brands. Not because of their prestige, but because the good quality was more comfortable for him. Where did he get those market trainers? And Andrew looked subtly different too. His eyes had a different look. There was light stubble on his usually clean-shaven face, and he seemed tired. But of course, it was Andrew. She would recognize her husband anywhere. His light, springy walk, his beautiful tanned skin, and the bright turquoise eyes that had once made her fall for him. She still often found herself admiring them. Andrew kept walking. Chloe trotted behind him. Why was he on foot? He usually took the car and didn't particularly like walking. Chloe was already late for work. She had gone out during lunch to grab a bite, unexpectedly saw her husband, and of course, rushed after him. It was fine. She had warned Victoria, who would come up with something to tell the boss. It wasn't the first time the friends had helped each other out like this. Victoria had her back. There was nothing to worry about. Finally, Andrew turned into one of the many restaurants on the high street. Chloe froze. Victoria's words about seeing her husband in a cafe with a beautiful blonde echoed in her head. Her friend and colleague had told her about it just the other day. Chloe had been sure Victoria was mistaken, as Victoria had never believed things would work out for Chloe and Andrew in the first place, something she had stated out loud many times. Victoria's own experience proved that it was simply impossible. How could a man as handsome, promising, and wealthy as Andrew, who was young and free, be with someone like Chloe? She was beautiful, no doubt, but she was a different kind of woman entirely. She lived in a small one-bedroom flat inherited from her grandmother, worked as an accountant for a small firm for peanuts, and most importantly, was a single mother. Who would want someone else's child? Does a princess need a lady with a child in tow? Victoria had asked. It's fine for a fling, but don't expect anything serious. It's only going to hurt later. Her colleague's words sounded logical and convincing. Why would Andrew want another man's child? And his parents would surely be against it. Back then, Chloe hadn't met her in-laws and couldn't have imagined how happy they would be to have Holly, her daughter, in their lives. Still, the relationship with Mark had one positive side. He had given her a priceless gift, a beautiful, healthy daughter. Then he had disappeared from her life. Obligations weighed on him. He wasn't ready for family life. It was hard to blame him. The decision to keep the baby had been entirely Chloe's, and it hadn't been easy. Even now, she shuddered when she thought about how desperate she had been almost 13 years ago. Chloe had been just a few steps away from making the biggest mistake of her life. It would have been more logical and easier for her to have a termination. How lucky that a young Chloe hadn't done it. Holly was already 12. She was tall, slim, and had large eyes, looking so much like Mark. It didn't sadden Chloe at all. Mark, whatever else he was a handsome man. Holly had his dark, almond-shaped eyes, glossy black hair, chiseled cheekbones, and sharp lips. She was already a teenager, a young lady. When Chloe walked with her, she often caught the glances of boys and even older guys on Holly. Soon, her daughter would blossom into a beautiful woman, and the thought that she might not have existed sometimes made Chloe's skin crawl. When her grandmother died, Chloe was completely alone. On paper, she was an adult, 20 years old, but she felt like a child. Her grandmother had always looked after her, cooked for her, comforted her, even woke her up in the mornings for university. She had surrounded Chloe with care and love like a warm, cozy blanket, and now she felt unbearably cold, desolate, and scared. Chloe missed her grandmother terribly. She cried a lot during that difficult time. She held it together in public, but at home she let her emotions loose, sobbing and mourning her loss. The thought that she was completely alone terrified her and even drove her to panic. How could you live if you were needed and cared for by no one? Chloe needed a strong shoulder, a loving companion. And just then, she met Mark, a tanned, handsome boy who worked as a janitor in their housing association. He was always cheerful, smiling, energetic, and quick on his feet. He was pure positive energy. Chloe noticed that the young janitor often looked at her as she came home from class, but guys like him probably didn't miss a single skirt. After a while, Mark started greeting Chloe and giving her a wide smile. She couldn't stay sad and gloomy then. His smile was too infectious. Anyone would have succumbed. Without her noticing, she developed a crush on him. Their relationship progressed to the point where they sometimes talked outside her building. She now knew he had come from a village, served in the army, and was in college, but didn't have enough money. His parents were, to put it mildly, not rich. So he worked part-time. Mark also knew a lot about Chloe, like that she lived alone and studied at a prestigious economics university. One day, Mark invited Chloe on a date. She was ecstatic. He was clearly flustered, blushing, stumbling over his words and looking at the ground. It was completely unlike the chatty, cheerful young man she knew, and it was endearing and touching. Of course, she said yes. Mark didn't have money, so they went to the embankment, where they walked, talked, and held hands. Later they kissed. Chloe felt herself drawn to Mark more and more. He was so pleasant and interesting. He had also just turned 20, but he had seen and learned more than Chloe could have imagined. Her life had been relatively peaceful and comfortable. While he'd had to work since he was 11 to help his family, been in the army, gotten into serious trouble, and gotten out of it. His life was a constant adventure. Mark walked Chloe home to her building. At the entrance, she suddenly realized she didn't want to part with him, but she didn't dare invite him in. Not then. Later, Mark moved in, and Chloe was happy with him for almost 2 years. Mark was a master at frying potatoes and eggs, and he cleaned the flat in no time. He was better at all of it than Chloe, who her grandmother had raised like a princess, protecting and coddling her. He also knew how to fix taps and repair furniture. Life had taught him everything. Chloe spent most of her time studying. Mark didn't bother with his studies. He was on the books at a building college, but he rarely showed up, preferring to earn money. He wasn't very successful at it. The budget consisted of Mark's occasional earnings, his part-time janitor salary, and Chloe's social grant. They had to be careful with every penny. This frustrated Mark a little. He wanted a beautiful life. But Chloe was happy anyway. The main thing was that a loving person was beside her. Mark was so sensitive and understanding. He always knew when she needed support and gave it to her. He was generous with compliments, which made her melt. However, Mark often met with his friends without her, and she didn't really mind. She was too busy with her assignments to go out anyway. Although sometimes, seeing him get ready to go out, she felt a little jealous. What if there were girls there? Mark was so handsome and sociable. Who could resist him? But he would assure her that he didn't notice anyone but her, that he didn't need anyone else. They're just my mates, my boys. We'll hang out, talk. It's like a stress reliever for us guys, you know. Chloe would nod, but would stay home with a heavy heart. Her intuition told her that not everything was as simple as Mark claimed, but she consciously silenced that quiet inner voice. 2 years flew by like a single day. Chloe was in her final year, and Mark was also finishing his college. Soon they would both be specialists and could get jobs. Then finally, they wouldn't have to scrimp on the bare necessities. Maybe they could even go to the seaside. That would be wonderful. One morning in February, Chloe realized that she was pregnant. Of course, they hadn't planned to have children. They hadn't even found their footing yet, barely getting by. But an unplanned pregnancy wasn't an isolated case. It happened all the time. Chloe wasn't the first or the last. People managed somehow, didn't they? And yet, she was scared. She even broke into a sweat when she looked at the pregnancy test she had taken to be certain. How would Mark react? He would probably be scared at first, but he was such a resourceful, worldly guy. He would definitely not be lost. He'd say everything would be fine, support her as always, and smile his signature wide, toothy smile. And Chloe would immediately feel at peace. But Mark's reaction was completely different. A baby? He even recoiled from her when she told him. What baby? Are you sure? I'm sure. 2 tests came back positive. This is so badly timed. You know that, right? Chloe nodded. Of course she understood. But what could they do if this little person was already living under her heart? She felt disappointed and hurt. She had thought his reaction would be different. We need to find money for a termination now, he said, as if to himself. Maybe I can borrow some from Liam. Hearing that dreadful word, Chloe flinched. What are you talking about? She asked, instinctively grabbing her still flat belly as if to protect it. She hadn't even considered that. Chloe, Mark said, getting a grip on himself and speaking in a gentle but firm voice. You know we're not in a position to be parents right now. What can we give this baby? We're barely scraping by as it is. We're almost done with our degrees. You can get a job in construction. I'll get maternity benefits. We'll manage, Chloe said. She had thought Mark would be the one to comfort her and say those words. But it turned out she had to take the initiative herself. The news of the baby had completely thrown Mark off. Of course, he would be ashamed of his cowardly words later. Chloe would never rub it in, even though it was so hurtful to hear. Mark kept trying to convince Chloe they couldn't keep the baby. He painted a depressing picture of their future and said he wasn't ready for such a huge responsibility. And at some point, she gave in to his persuasions. He was right about everything. They had no money. They weren't even done with their studies. Their tiny 1-bedroom flat was too small for 2 of them, let alone a baby. A baby would require so much money, nappies, medicine, and clothes that they outgrew at a dizzying pace. And she wouldn't be able to work for a long time. When the baby was old enough to go to nursery, a professional with no experience wouldn't be needed anywhere. She would have to put her diploma on a shelf and work as a cleaner or a supermarket cashier. Mark was right. Is that the future we dreamed of? Mark asked. You deserve more. Maybe I really do need to go to a clinic, Chloe sighed sadly. After a thorough manipulation by the talented Mark, she couldn't see any other way out. His influence had worked. He had gotten what he wanted. Good girl, Mark beamed. You'll have a baby later. Don't worry. In a few years, we'll give it everything. Nice clothes, toys, its own room. But now, it's just not possible. It's not the right time. That same day, Chloe called a clinic and booked an appointment for the procedure. She was in a desperate situation then and thought she was doing the right thing. In the morning, she went to the clinic with a heavy heart. In her bag were all the necessary items they had told her to bring. Slippers, a gown, a pad. She would have to spend the whole day there and would only be allowed to go home in the evening, and only if everything went well. There was a queue in the waiting room. Chloe sat in a corner on a sofa and, with nothing to do, started looking at people. She was shaking and could barely control her shivers. How she wished Mark was with her, holding her hand, stroking her back, assuring her that everything would be all right. But he had gone to a job. It was the right thing to do. They needed money, especially since they had had to pay a large sum for this procedure this month. A woman in her 40s sat next to her. She was well kept, beautiful, expensively and tastefully dressed. Her manicure was exquisite, her hairstyle fashionable. Chloe thought that in 20 years she would love to look like that. But the woman's eyes were so sad. A man, probably her husband, came up to her. It was clear they were a wealthy couple. It's all done. I've filled out the paperwork. They'll call you soon, he said, placing a hand on his wife's shoulder. Everything will be all right? For some reason, Chloe immediately decided that this woman also wanted to get rid of an unwanted pregnancy. Her husband was saying the same words as Mark. Everything will be all right. Why? What could be all right? They looked older. Maybe it was an accidental pregnancy. What could possibly be all right about this? Chloe's neighbor looked at her husband. What could be all right about this situation? She asked. 11 rounds of IVF, 5 miscarriages. Again, these painful procedures, the treatments, the recovery, and then we'll start all over again. The woman looked like she was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. There was so much pain and sympathy in her husband's eyes. He didn't know how to help his wife or what to say, so he just hugged her. What an idiot I was, the woman almost whispered. I was scared I wouldn't manage it then. I had just finished high school and university, and a career were ahead of me. My son would be 24 now. I knew it was a boy. I felt it right away. And now I'm paying for that mistake for the rest of my life. It's what I deserve. It's right that they won't give me any more children. It's a punishment. The man continued to silently comfort his wife, stroking her back and her hair, squeezing her hands in his. He clearly couldn't find the right words. Chloe stared at the adult couple with wide eyes. She understood everything from their short dialogue. Years ago, as a teenager, this woman had had a termination. And now, because of the consequences, she couldn't have children. She suffered, worried, and spent a fortune on trying to achieve her dream of motherhood. But it didn't work. Chloe suddenly realized she would never get rid of her baby. She already loved it, even though it was just a clump of cells. That's what Mark had called their baby when he had insisted on a termination. Chloe was a grown-up now. She was almost done with university, just a little bit more, and she would have her diploma. And Mark was with her. She wasn't alone. Together, they would manage. She ran out of the clinic as if chased by a pack of dogs. People looked at her in surprise. Once on the street, Chloe let out a sigh of relief. She felt like she had just escaped a huge disaster. She put her hand on her belly and smiled. Her baby was with her, and it was a girl. At that moment, Chloe knew for sure that it wasn't a clump of cells, but her daughter, her beloved, beautiful, healthy girl. They would meet in 7 months. Mark wasn't thrilled with Chloe's story. "This is not serious at all," he said. "I'll take you back to the clinic tomorrow. You shouldn't have left." That was their first fight. Chloe insisted on her decision. Mark tried to prove she was wrong. Before, his arguments had seemed so logical and right, but now Chloe wondered how she could have ever agreed with them. "Yes, it will be hard for a while," she said. "But we're adults now. We'll manage. I can't do that." Finally, Mark slammed the door and walked out into the dark March evening. Chloe thought he would cool down and come back with an apology. He had always understood her so well before. The same thing would happen now. But Mark only showed up in the morning, drunk and aggressive. He again insisted that she get rid of the baby. "I have a right to decide too. This concerns me." But she couldn't be convinced now. He quickly realized that. He was good at reading people. They barely talked to each other during that time. Chloe would ask him questions, but he wouldn't even answer. He would only come home to sleep, and not even every night. Chloe hoped that with time, he would get used to the idea of becoming a father. Everything would be fine between them. They had such a warm, close relationship. Of course, they would make up sooner or later. Mark would come to his senses. He would even be ashamed of himself. But one day, when she came home from university, Chloe found that Mark's things were gone. And so was Mark. She understood immediately. She had been wrong to hope that he would support her. She had been wrong to think he just needed time to get used to the situation. Mark had no intention of taking responsibility for the baby. And he probably didn't even love her that much. It wasn't until much later that Chloe realized Mark had used her. He had lived in her flat, and rent was not cheap. His earnings were not enough for such an expense. Besides, she had looked after him, cooked, washed and ironed his clothes, and cleaned up after him. He had lived on her dime. At first, he had impressed her with his culinary skills and housekeeping. But then he was always tired from his allegedly hard work, from college, from going out with his friends. Somehow, without her noticing, Chloe had taken all the chores on her shoulders, and she was happy to do something for the person she loved. And yet, Chloe tried to find him. How could he just disappear without saying goodbye? It wasn't right. Whatever he was, the baby she carried was his. The baby needed a father. But it turned out Mark had been expelled from college almost 2.5 years ago. What a revelation. So he had been using college as an excuse to go somewhere else? What a masterful liar he was. He had told her so convincingly that he was going to his lectures, but he had been somewhere else. A guy from college, who had overheard Chloe asking about Mark, came up to her. "You're looking for Mark, aren't you?" he said. Chloe nodded. "I thought so. The name's Turkish. There can't be many Marks here. Tell me, what happened?" "He was totally in love at first. Then he borrowed a good amount of money and ran off." "No," Chloe said, shaking her head. "He just disappeared. We lived together for almost 2 years. Everything was fine. You lived in your flat, didn't you? Probably at your expense. He wouldn't pay for anything." Chloe suddenly realized the guy was right. Mark had earned money from time to time, but he had spent it mostly on himself. On trendy clothes and gadgets. He rarely bought Chloe small bouquets of flowers or fruit baskets. She was so happy with the attention, so in love, that she hadn't noticed the obvious. Looking at it soberly, Mark had lived off her. "Something like that?" the guy mumbled thoughtfully. "But not exactly." "Not exactly." "Well, in any case, you should be happy he's gone. He's a freeloader, a hanger-on, a poor boy from a village who doesn't want to study or work, but dreams of a beautiful life. It was obvious from the outside how he tried to befriend boys from wealthy families and daughters of rich parents to get money from them. At first, he was successful, but then everyone at college realized what he was, and his tricks no longer worked. But there are lots of rich kids outside college. So Mark went hunting elsewhere. He was later expelled for poor grades. Chloe's eyes were wide, trying to process what she was hearing. "But I'm not the daughter of rich parents. Quite the opposite. You have a flat and a steady income of some kind. Look, I'm sorry to say this, but you look naive and inexperienced. It's easy to pull the wool over your eyes. He just had nowhere to live and latched onto you. He lived a little in a safe haven without worrying about paying rent. I'm sure he was still hunting all this time." Chloe thought about it. Yes, Mark had often disappeared with some friends she knew nothing about. Maybe this guy was right. And now he had probably found someone better and had just left. "You should be happy he's gone," the guy said. "Don't look for him. And if he ever shows up again after another failure, send him away. Don't even let him in the door. That's my advice." Chloe didn't believe the guy then, because it was hard to accept that the person she had been so in love with was not who he pretended to be. Overcoming her shyness, she asked a few more people, choosing older students who were almost graduating. They also remembered Mark and had the exact same opinion about him as the first guy. Chloe went home with a heavy heart. It felt like the ground had been swept from under her feet. For 2 years, she had had a completely different picture in her head. A beautiful, bright, right picture. But it turned out Mark had been using her. When he found out about the pregnancy, the cunning boy had understood what it meant. Responsibility, child support, a screaming baby in a tiny flat, a lifetime of problems, or at least for the first 18 years after the baby was born. It was too high a price to pay for free lodging and not so luxurious meals. So he had run away. He probably wasn't even in the city anymore. No one was holding him here. Then Chloe thought about the baby. How would she raise it? Would she be able to manage? She didn't know the answer, but she knew one thing. Despite her desperate situation, this baby would be born. She had no family left in this world, but now she would have a daughter. She felt it would be a girl. Together, they would manage all the hardships life threw at them. After that came a difficult period. Her final year, a responsible last semester, and state exams. Chloe studied like crazy, from morning till night. She no longer thought about Mark. She simply didn't have the time. On top of that, she was hit with terrible morning sickness. She was constantly nauseous and dizzy, but no one was cancelling her exams or giving a pregnant student a break. She knew she had to get that diploma. She couldn't give up at the finish line, even though it was so hard to study in that state. One thing made her happy. At the maternity clinic where she had registered, they told her at every appointment that everything was going as planned and the baby was healthy and developing as it should. The doctor's words encouraged her and warmed her heart. A few months flew by. She had her diploma and her state exams were passed with flying colors. Chloe was happy and proud of herself. She had done it. But what now? Her pregnancy was already past the halfway mark. Her belly was barely showing, but no one suspected she was pregnant. After her defense, the dean unexpectedly invited the successful student to his office. A little surprised, Chloe went to the second floor and timidly knocked on the door. "Come in," the dean said. Peter Anderson, who was usually so strict and serious, was now smiling broadly, with cheerful sparks in his eyes. "You're a great student," he began. "You had good grades throughout all your years here and you did well on your final exams. So I recommended you to the recruiters at the gas factory. They need smart, young economists, and the salaries there, you know what they're like." Of course she knew. She had never even dreamed of working there. The employees of the gas factory lived in huge new flats and houses and drove expensive cars. In their town, the phrase gas factory employee had become a common term for wealthy people who could afford anything they wanted. Chloe's head spun from the prospects, but then her daughter stirred in her belly, bringing her back to reality. Who would want an employee with no experience who would be going on maternity leave in a couple of months? It would be easy to lie and hide the pregnancy now. Her belly was barely visible, but she would still have to come clean later. She would have to listen to a lot of accusations and put people in a difficult position. Chloe was not capable of that. Realizing that the tempting job was slipping away, she almost cried. That job could have solved all her problems at once. She really wanted to work, to get her hands dirty with practice. But fate had other plans. "Peter, I have to tell you something about this offer," Chloe said. She still had a weak hope that everything would work out. Maybe the dean would say that a pregnancy was nothing to worry about. Work for a couple of months, go on maternity leave, and then come back to the factory. They'll wait for such a promising economist. But the man, hearing her confession, grunted in disappointment. "Is there nothing that can be done? It's a late term, isn't it? Such an offer comes once in a lifetime. It's a shame to miss the opportunity. You're a good girl, you'd be a great economist, and you need the money. I can see that. I know your story. That's why I decided to help." Chloe shook her head. She knew everything the dean was saying was true, but there was nothing she could do. And the baby. She would never get rid of it, even if she hadn't passed the deadline. She walked home, crying uncontrollably, not paying attention to the people staring at her. It would have been better if the offer had never come. Such prospects, a completely different life. It was hard to turn down such a job. But she didn't want to lie or deceive anyone. It wasn't in her nature to put people in a bad position. Besides, Peter had said it wouldn't have worked out anyway because the gas factory employees had to go through a medical checkup. So it was what it was. At home, Chloe calmed down and got a grip on herself. She was going to have a baby. She had to be strong. She also had to solve a ton of problems before the baby was born. The first was financial. She wouldn't be getting her grant anymore. And no one would hire her for a job when she was about to go on maternity leave. But that was for a job in her field. There were other jobs that didn't require high qualifications or a formal contract. The pay was low, but she needed to live on something. She also had to save up some money so she wouldn't have to work when the baby was very little. The government gave some benefits for children, but Chloe already knew it was a pittance. You couldn't live on that. So Chloe, an excellent student with a first-class degree, went to work cleaning staircases in the same housing association where Mark had once worked as a janitor. She scrubbed the stairs early in the morning and late in the evening when there weren't many people around. The pay was good by her standards. It was enough to live on, and she even managed to save a little. Of course, she wasn't living in luxury, but after her grandmother's death, she had gotten used to living modestly, so she wasn't particularly worried about it. The physical labor turned out to be the best calming medicine. All her difficult and sad thoughts seemed to just disappear. Chloe even felt a sense of joy when a sparkling clean staircase appeared before her eyes instead of a dirty one. There was something soothing, even peaceful about it. At the same time, she was looking for a job online. She knew she couldn't wield a mop forever. Her belly was growing by the day, and it was getting harder to hide. It was also getting in the way. She couldn't bend down or reach properly, and carrying buckets of water was dangerous. What if something happened? And then Chloe found another way to make money, even more successful than the last one. And most importantly, having a small child wouldn't be a hindrance. It turned out that hundreds of thousands of students across the country didn't want to write their own papers and essays. They couldn't just download ready-made work because teachers knew them by heart, and online plagiarism checkers made it even harder. So there was a demand for people who could write these papers for money, and Chloe could. She sighed with relief when she realized that her university knowledge would save her in this difficult situation. Chloe quit her cleaning job because she couldn't do it anymore, and delved into her new work, which she loved. She had been afraid that her knowledge would be forgotten and become outdated during her maternity leave. But now she would be up to date on everything happening in the economy. She worked and felt her professionalism growing. She couldn't be happier. She managed to save enough money to get everything ready for her baby. Nappies for the first few months, bottles, rompers, a bathtub. It turned out a little person needed so much. She even bought a pram, not a new one, of course. New ones cost an arm and a leg. She got a second-hand one from an ad. It was a wonderful ride for a princess. A light pink pram with beautiful flowers on the side and in excellent condition. In due time, little Holly was born. When they placed the baby on her chest in the delivery room, the young mother burst into tears. She was no longer alone. She was a mother. It was so hard and so much responsibility, but what joy! Her days in the hospital with her baby girl were incredibly happy. Chloe didn't have to work, clean, or cook. She was invited to the canteen 5 times a day and was given clean nappies for her daughter. It was paradise. Sometimes she would look out the window at the celebrations that families held for new mothers being discharged from the hospital. Balloons, laughter, songs, crowds of relatives and friends all happily greeting the new family member and showering the mother with flowers. Chloe smiled, watching these scenes. But she was sad too. No one was waiting for her. Only she herself was happy about Holly's arrival. But surprisingly, Chloe was wrong. When she walked out of the hospital with the little bundle in her arms, a small crowd was waiting for her. A couple of her university friends, some colleagues from the housing association, they were all smiling with flowers and balloons. Chloe was so touched she almost cried. Her friends put her in a taxi and sent her home. Someone had to carry the balloons, flowers, and bags of gifts for the baby. So, Chloe had her own festive discharge, and then the daily life of a young mother began. Chloe didn't get used to her new role as easily as she had planned. Sleepless nights, inexperience, and the unpredictability of her daughter's behavior. With the baby's arrival, new fears emerged that she had never thought about before. What if Holly choked during feeding? What if a rash on her body was a symptom of a terrible disease? Why was she crying so much? Maybe she needed medical help. And Chloe had to work. The child benefits were tiny. There were times when the young mother was rocking her daughter with one arm while typing another paper with the other because deadlines were tight. She slept very little during this difficult period. There was no one to ask for help. She had to look after the baby herself, work, and keep the house clean. She also had to go to the clinic and take her for a walk every day. Chloe was exhausted and skinny, and there were deep circles under her eyes. Sometimes, she didn't even have time to brush her hair. She would just twist her long, tangled hair into a messy bun, hoping to fix it later, and would only remember about it at noon. And yet, despite all the difficulties, she never once regretted her decision to keep the baby. On the contrary, looking at her daughter, she was horrified at what she could have done. She had already gone to that clinic, already taken a number, already decided to go through with it. Chloe chased those thoughts away. She didn't want to think about them anymore. Holly grew into a calm, easy baby. She hit all her milestones on time. Her teeth grew when they were supposed to. She sat up on schedule and she started walking even earlier than expected. Chloe had no one to talk to at home, so she was always talking to her daughter. Maybe that's why Holly started talking at an age when other children were not even attempting their first words. The mothers at the playground were amazed by the smart, cute little girl, and Chloe's heart was filled with joy and maternal pride. She had a wonderful daughter, the best. How lucky she was to have her. When Holly was 2, she went to nursery. She got used to the new place very quickly without tears or tantrums, as if she understood there was no other way and didn't want to cause her mother any extra trouble. Holly didn't even get sick during the adaptation period, unlike other children. Once she knew her daughter was settled, Chloe started looking for a job in her field. Working online was good, of course, but the money was not great and was unstable. The young mother had to be frugal with everything, and she wanted to buy her daughter toys and pretty dresses, and to spoil herself sometimes. She had studied for 5 years. It was time to find a job in her field. Her degree couldn't gather dust on the shelf forever. Of course, she faced difficulties. An employee with no experience and a small child. The sick leaves will be endless. We know how you young mothers are. My daughter has been going to nursery for a long time and doesn't get sick. There are no problems with that. Everyone says that. You're not a good fit for us. We need someone with experience. You won't manage. Chloe went to interviews as if it were a job, and everywhere she faced the same thing. It was disheartening. How am I supposed to get experience if no one will hire me without it? She asked a recruiter once. The woman was taken aback. That's not my problem, she said. But one day, luck smiled on her. A furniture repair company urgently needed an economist. The salary was not particularly high, so there was no queue of applicants. They needed someone right now. They hired Chloe despite her lack of experience and her small child. They couldn't afford to be so picky. Chloe quickly proved her worth. She did her job diligently, managed to get everything done, and even offered ideas to improve the accounting. She was finally doing what she had studied for, and the management quickly appreciated her enthusiasm. The young employee was respected, and she even got a raise. We need enthusiasts like her boss would often say. Chloe's heart was filled with warmth with every compliment. A bonus to her beloved job and decent salary was the social life, a workplace full of adults. How much she had missed that. For 2 years, she had only talked to her little daughter, and now there were jokes, coffee breaks, and news and opinions to exchange. She had missed all that. At this company, she met Victoria. They were almost the same age and quickly became friends. Victoria often visited Chloe and invited her over. Victoria still lived with her parents. They had a lot in common, but their opinions on some things diverged, which sometimes led to heated debates. But even that was interesting and fun. Life had improved. Chloe was working and making good money. She no longer had to scrimp on food and clothes. She even managed to save up for a summer trip with Holly to the seaside. Luckily, Victoria offered to go with them. It was a wonderful holiday, and it was repeated several times. Holly was doing well. She was growing into a beautiful girl, looking very much like Mark, but her character and academic abilities were just like her mother's. She learned to read, write, and count quickly and effortlessly, even before school. She always went to nursery with a book, and she was a great artist. Chloe couldn't get enough of her treasure. But Victoria wasn't so lucky in her personal life. She often went on dates and had casual flings, and then would share her latest disappointment with Chloe over a glass of wine. Maybe we should just give up on men. Maybe they really are all awful. Yours left you pregnant and ran away. I don't know what to tell you, Chloe would say, shaking her head. You know I don't have much experience in this. Maybe you're right. But in reality, she didn't think that. She knew there were many wonderful men in the world. Kind, brave, sensitive, caring. She just didn't want to argue with Victoria, and her own emotions were in a mess too. Of course, Chloe sometimes thought she needed someone in her life, a reliable shoulder, a wall she could hide behind from the troubles of life, because doing it all by herself was very hard. She didn't even have anyone to share her worries with. She would happily take care of that person, surround him with love and care, and Holly would have a father who would be silly with her outside and carry her on his shoulders. Holly was clearly missing that. Chloe saw how her daughter watched father and daughter pairs. She didn't say anything to her mother to not upset her, but Chloe noticed everything. But where could she find such a man? When would she have the time? Work, home, daughter. Chloe didn't go anywhere. Sometimes, Victoria would drag her to a pub or a cafe. Holly was old enough to be alone for a few hours, but her heart was not at peace. She was always thinking about her child and couldn't relax. Why are you so restless? Victoria would say. Look at those cool guys at the next table staring at us. They're about to come over and introduce themselves. I think I need to go, Chloe would say. You always do this, Victoria would complain. Just when something interesting is about to happen, you run away. Victoria couldn't fully understand her friend. She didn't have children herself, and she couldn't imagine what it was like to worry about your own blood. By the way, Victoria was still single. She had her share of passionate romances, but they all ended the same way. She would either be disappointed in the man, or he would disappear without a word. When Andrew came into Chloe's life, she initially didn't want to tell Victoria about it. Her friend had just gone through a bad breakup and was an emotional mess. But the perceptive Victoria guessed everything. Do you have a man? Kind of. How did you know? Your eyes gave you away, Victoria chuckled. Come on, spill. Who is he? How did you meet? So Chloe had to tell her everything. She didn't mind. She really wanted to share the story with her friend, especially since the story was a true fairy tale. Chloe always came home at the same time. She would drive from work to school to pick up Holly, and they would go to the shop for some treats before walking home slowly, without a rush. It was a wonderful time. Mother and daughter would share the news of the day and talk about their plans for the evening. That May evening, everything was normal at first. Holly was in high spirits. Long holidays, a school camp, and a gift from her mother for finishing her first year with excellent grades. The girl was walking next to Chloe and bouncing with excitement. Chloe was smiling. She didn't try to stop her. Let her have fun. Then a man came up to them. He was handsome and young, and his expensive branded clothes immediately gave away his social status. He was looking straight at Chloe, walking towards her. There was no doubt about it. Hello, he said, a little flustered. Don't be scared, I just don't know how to start this conversation. But we need to talk, or at least I do. Chloe stopped. Holly looked at the stranger with curiosity, but no fear. Chloe thought that she was setting a bad example for her daughter. She had always told her not to talk to strangers. But on the other hand, there was nothing to be afraid of. The street was busy, and people were hurrying by. They were in no danger, and this stranger didn't evoke fear or dislike. He was clearly flustered, even though he was probably a confident and self-sufficient man. It was endearing, and his open gaze, handsome smile, and calm voice, Chloe suddenly realized she wanted to listen to him. Maybe we can go to a cafe, he suggested. I'm sure the little girl wouldn't say no to an ice cream. I wouldn't, Holly said, smiling at him. No, that's not necessary, Chloe said, shaking her head. Realizing he didn't know how to talk in front of a child, she sent Holly to a nearby playground. Chloe could see everything her daughter was doing. Holly could no longer hear the conversation. So, what did you want to talk about? The young man introduced himself as Andrew, and then he told her what had happened. As he told his story, Chloe was amazed, delighted, and tried to hide her happy smile. She felt like she was the heroine of a romantic comedy. It turned out that Andrew had a late dinner at this cafe every evening. Its walls were transparent, made of thick tempered glass. As was understandable, he would look at the street. And one day, he saw Chloe and her daughter. Your light walk, your kind gaze. You looked at your daughter with such tenderness, like a Madonna with her child from an old painting. I don't know how to explain it. Andrew was flustered and stumbled over his words, but Chloe understood perfectly what he was trying to say. Don't get the wrong idea. I assume you're not married, you're free, and maybe we can try to meet, go for a walk somewhere, and talk? I'm a single mother. That's true. But how did you know that? I just guessed, Andrew said, smiling broadly. It was clear that Chloe's admission that she was free made him very happy. There's no ring on your finger. Besides, I have never seen you with anyone, just you and your daughter. I've been watching you for a while now. That probably sounds creepy, but don't worry, it's not, he assured her. I won't, Chloe said. Her heart was beating with joy, and goosebumps were running up and down her spine. She was trying hard not to show her feelings. You have dinner here, and Holly and I walk by every day at that time. It's not surprising that you see us all the time. Andrew smiled again. You're right. That's exactly how it happened. When I see you, I feel so happy and so warm inside. Well, now I've said it out loud. That's why I decided to talk to you. I think you're a wonderful person, and there aren't many like you. And of course, you're very beautiful. At this, Chloe couldn't hold back her smile. She hadn't received a compliment in so long. She hadn't felt so lovely and desired in a long time. It was incredibly nice to see the interest in this man's eyes and feel his affection. After that, the conversation flowed more easily and naturally. They switched to a more casual tone. He no longer felt flustered. He talked a little about himself and asked her some questions. Their closeness happened so naturally and simply. A little later, Holly, who was done playing, sat on the bench with them. She made the atmosphere even more relaxed with her childish spontaneity. Somehow, Holly and Andrew hit it off right away. Then came the meetings and dates, sometimes with Holly, sometimes without her. Chloe was afraid to believe that she had finally met her person. Andrew understood her, accepted her, respected her opinion, and was always ready to offer his help. She felt that if she came to him with any problem, he would solve it right away and with joy because he could help. Of course, there were doubts. The story with Mark was still fresh in her mind, even though it had been many years. And Andrew was younger than her. He had a high-ranking position at a large company, and his parents were very wealthy. Would they want a daughter-in-law like her? And what about Andrew? He was rich, handsome, and practically perfect. There were probably crowds of admirers around him. He didn't even hide it. Of course, I've met many women. But you are different from all of them. You're the best, sincere, honest, a little naive, tender. Women like you don't exist anymore. I must be so lucky to have met you by chance. Chloe's heart melted at his words. She already loved Andrew with all her heart and felt that he had equally strong feelings for her, but she still couldn't believe that a long-term serious relationship was possible for them. Others were pouring oil on the fire, especially Victoria, a master of being disappointed in men. These rich guys always look for a partner from their own class. I've had similar stories. Remember Liam, a businessman with a cool car? He told me he loved me, but then he used me and left. He married his dad's business partner's daughter. It's a common story. Don't get your hopes up, or it will hurt later. But it all turned out completely differently than Victoria had prophesied. Andrew proposed to her. He looked so worried as he watched her, stunned by the unexpected proposal, tried to figure out what to say. He later told her he thought she was coming up with a polite refusal, but she just didn't know what to do because she was stunned and because the belief that they weren't right for each other was firmly rooted in her mind. "I love you very much, you know that," she finally said. "But won't you regret this later? We're not from the same world, and I have a daughter, you know that." "You really think that?" Andrew said, amazed. Then he hugged her tightly. "I love you. I don't need anyone else. I'm happy that I saw you that day. It's the biggest gift of my life." Chloe burst into tears then, from joy, from the surprise, from the touching situation. It was so nice to feel so valued and loved. "What about your parents? Won't they be against it?" Andrew smiled, realizing his mistake. "I should have introduced you to them a long time ago. Then these questions wouldn't even have come up." Andrew's parents turned out to be incredibly pleasant and kind people. They welcomed Chloe and Holly so warmly that she had no doubts left. Andrew was serious about marrying her. Everything would be all right. "Children are a huge blessing," Andrew's mother, Eleanor, said, looking at Holly tenderly. "She's so beautiful. You have a very good girl." Holly reciprocated the affection. While Chloe had been shy around her in-laws at first, her 7-year-old daughter immediately hit it off with them. She had always needed a grandmother and a grandfather, and Eleanor and Arthur were perfect. Then came the wedding. It wasn't a lavish event with a lot of guests, but a small family celebration, as both the bride and groom wanted. Afterwards, the newlyweds, Chloe, Andrew, and Holly, flew to a warm seaside resort. It was a wonderful holiday together, full of sun, fun, and pleasant surprises. Then their life as a family began in Andrew's large flat. Their daily routine settled in quickly. After just a couple of months, it felt like it had always been this way. 2 years after the wedding, the family grew by 2 new members. Chloe gave birth to twin boys. Theo and Peter were so funny and so cute. They quickly became everyone's favorites. Eleanor, Andrew's mother, loved to spend time with the little ones. The happy grandmother would come to the young family's flat almost every day at first to help her daughter-in-law. After all, 2 babies at once was no joke. She was often accompanied by her husband Arthur, who also adored the children and was always coming up with fun games. When Grandpa came to visit, the house was always filled with squeals and laughter. Chloe loved their visits. Andrew turned out to be not only a wonderful husband, but also a caring father. He didn't treat Holly any differently than his sons. He gave everyone equal attention. Time passed. The boys grew up and went to nursery. Chloe could finally go back to work. Of course, she didn't need the money like she used to, but she loved her job. She also liked her colleagues and the social life. She didn't want to be a housewife, although Andrew had offered it more than once. She explained her decision, and he, as always, understood. They had been together for 6 years. These years had changed Chloe. She was calmer, more feminine, more at peace. How could she not be when she had a man in her life she hadn't even dreamed of, because he was too good to be true? But now she was unexpectedly running down the street after her perfect husband, who apparently was rushing to meet his mistress. She hadn't believed Victoria's words about seeing Andrew in a cafe with a stunning woman. She had felt sorry for her friend, who so desperately wanted to have what Chloe had: a husband, children, a strong family. She had thought Victoria's words about Andrew were either a fabrication or a mistake. But there he was, Andrew, strangely dressed, unshaven, and looking exhausted. And he was still walking when he was supposed to be at home with their son. Finally, the restaurant. He went in. Chloe waited a little to not run into him at the door, and then she also slipped inside. She chose a far corner table behind a potted plant. It was a comfortable vantage point from where she could barely be seen. And there he was, Andrew. He had settled at a table on the opposite wall, far enough that she couldn't hear him, but perfectly placed for her to observe. And yes, he wasn't alone. She was already waiting for him at the table the blonde Victoria had talked about. She hadn't been mistaken then. The woman was very attractive and looked at him so attentively, so captivated as she told him something. Andrew's replies were monosyllabic. He looked at her with interest, nodding along, but his eyes were so worried. She must be telling her lover how tired he was of his life with his wife and 3 children. Maybe he was even complaining about having to raise another man's child. All the complexes and stereotypes that had once tormented Chloe and had since died down suddenly came back to life. They reared their ugly heads. Chloe was desperately jealous of Andrew with this chatty beauty. It also hurt. It hurt that everyone, including Victoria, had been right. A man like Andrew would never be happy with a woman like her. He needed someone more striking, more presentable, like this blonde. Suddenly, Andrew hung his head as if he had heard something sad or scary. The blonde put her hand on his shoulder in a gentle, reassuring gesture. He covered her hand with his. They smiled at each other. At that, Chloe's vision went dark from all the emotions. If she could have explained their talk away as a business meeting before, she couldn't now. Suddenly, Andrew got up and headed towards the smoking area. This also seemed strange. Andrew had never smoked and had always lived a healthy lifestyle. Chloe followed him like a shadow. She would talk to him now. She would ask him about the blonde. She wasn't going to wait until the evening. In this situation, he would be flustered and wouldn't be able to come up with an excuse or lie on the spot. It was the element of surprise. When he saw her, he just gave her an indifferent glance. Something was wrong with him. Something unfamiliar was in her beloved man's face. Could being with a mistress change him so much? And how could he stay so calm after seeing his wife? Chloe gave him a stern look. Andrew raised his eyebrows in surprise, looking at her face. And suddenly, a look of understanding flashed in his eyes. He seemed to have remembered Chloe and finally recognized her. The situation was getting more and more confusing. "Andrew, can you finally explain what's going on here?" Chloe didn't expect her voice to tremble from the tears welling up in her eyes. "You must be Veronica," the man said with an embarrassed smile. Only now did Chloe notice an old, deep scar on his temple and a tattoo on his arm, and the man seemed to be thinner than Andrew. "Who are you?" she breathed out. She swayed, grabbing the wall so she wouldn't fall. The man gently held her. His movements, his facial expressions, his features, everything was exactly like Andrew's. And yet it wasn't him. Now, up close, Chloe saw it clearly. "Perhaps it's for the best that it happened this way." The man smiled. "I didn't know how to tell you about myself, even though I found you almost a month ago. I've been living in your city all this time. Victoria and she's a private detective, she helped me with the search. We were collecting evidence and testimony. There's no longer any doubt. The only thing left is the most difficult part. The meeting. I don't understand anything." "That's not surprising. It's such a unique story, it would beat any Bollywood film. I thought you were my husband." "That's understandable. Andrew and we're natural copies of each other. Clones, twins. My husband is the only child in the family," Chloe protested weakly. "If Eleanor and Arthur had other children, they would have told me about them." Chloe knew the elderly couple had struggled to have children for a long time. Andrew was a very late and long-awaited child, and he was born alone. "I suggest we go to the table. Victoria and I will tell you everything there." Chloe nodded weakly. The blonde raised her eyebrows in surprise when she saw Chloe, but she seemed to recognize her. At least she immediately addressed her by name. "This is truly an incredible story," Victoria said. "It's going to change your husband's life, and yours, of course." Victoria began the story. The man who looked so much like Andrew, whose name turned out to be Mark, occasionally interjected, adding details and correcting her. In a distant London, there lived a large family, a mother, a father, and 4 children. The couple had no education or support from their parents. All they had was a 2-bedroom flat in a dilapidated 2-story block on the outskirts of the city. It was an old wooden building, leaning to one side. It was condemned housing, but the family had nowhere else to live. They were short on money. The head of the family worked wherever he could, helping people with their gardening, fixing roofs, or unloading trucks at shops. In short, he was a laborer. In the morning, he would go out to find work, and in the evening, he would often come back drunk but without any money. The mother rarely worked. She was either pregnant or had a baby in her arms. In 6 years of marriage, the couple had managed to have 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls. You would think that was enough, given their circumstances, but the mother thought otherwise. First, they were paid benefits for the children. Second, having a baby meant she had a legitimate reason not to work. Her husband had always hoped that when the youngest grew up, his wife would help him earn money for the family, but she had other plans. She just loved children, especially when they were tiny, squeaking bundles that smelled so good. How could she deny herself that pleasure? So, against her husband's hopes, she got pregnant for the 5th time, tricking him by telling him they were having sex on safe days. Women could do that if they wanted to. Her husband was in despair when he found out he was going to be a father again. One more mouth to feed was too much. And he suspected there was more than one baby. Her belly was growing suspiciously fast this time. She hadn't gone for an ultrasound because they didn't have money, and she hadn't registered early at the clinic. She was experienced and knew it was easiest to see the doctors on the eve of giving birth. But her experienced acquaintances all said the same thing: twins. An elderly woman on the ground floor, a former midwife, had felt 2 heads in her belly. "Twins for sure," the neighbor said with authority. "I'm never wrong." The woman smiled happily while her husband clutched his head, and twins on top of that. At that time, the father of 5 had found a good side job taking care of the gardens at the house of a wealthy businessman, Arthur Collins. Everyone in the city knew him. He owned a chain of restaurants and cafes. The man was lucky to get a seasonal job with him. Collins paid well and was generous. The work was simple and pleasant, and the house and garden were luxurious. What a life, the man thought. But the happy, wealthy couple didn't look happy at all. And the new gardener quickly found out why. The couple couldn't have children. No matter what they did, it didn't work. The husband had taken his wife to every clinic, had her see every doctor, but nothing helped. The father of 5 had scoffed to himself. If only my wife had that problem. One day, Collins's wife broke down crying in the garden. Collins awkwardly tried to comfort her, trying to find the right words. That's when the idea came to the multi-child father. He waited for a moment when Collins was alone and approached him. "You can't have a baby, can you? And I have 4 kids, and now another set of twins on the way. We can't afford them, so maybe we can give you the babies for a good price? My wife didn't register at the clinic, so the babies don't exist on paper. What do you think?" Collins was outraged at first and yelled at him. But a couple of days later, he asked him to talk seriously. The businessman had discussed the offer with his wife, and she had happily jumped at the chance to become a mother to newborn twins. That evening, the father returned to his shack in high spirits. He had made a great deal. He would get rid of unnecessary children and make some money. Besides, at least one of his children would have a decent life. He was a little jealous of the unborn twins. "Those kids are lucky," he thought. But his wife unexpectedly objected. "How can you give away our children? They're my own. I already feel them. I'm waiting for them. I won't give my babies to anyone. Let them adopt from an orphanage. The children there are Alky's kids. They're probably sick. Our babies will be a joy to behold. And besides, what would they see at their home? And there, they would have a house and money." But the woman was insistent. She would not agree. But her husband had no intention of giving up on his plan. He told Collins about the problem. "My wife doesn't want to part with the children. She won't even give one of them away. and then the businessman laid out a plan that only such a powerful and rich man could execute. In due time, the young woman in the local hospital gave birth to 2 boys. The mother was a little surprised at how they were treating her. They hadn't fussed over her like this before. She was given so much attention and care. It must have been because she was having twins. "The babies are weak," the doctor said, shaking her head worriedly. "We need to take them to the intensive care unit." "Don't worry," the midwife immediately reassured her. "They're twins. It's always like this with twins. Everything will be fine." But the midwife was wrong. In the morning, the mother was brought only one of her sons to feed. The other one had not survived the night, she was told. In reality, the baby had been handed over to the Collins family. This was the plan Arthur Collins had proposed. That same night, Eleanor also came to the hospital. She had pretended to go into labor. No one was supposed to know that the baby wasn't hers. They were discharged on the same day. One woman from the outskirts and Collins's wife. One was met by her husband and her older children, happy that everything had gone well. The other had a festive discharge with music, balloons, and a photographer. Only a very small circle of people knew that the babies those women were holding were blood twin brothers, and they were all silent because each of them had received a substantial amount of money and a warning. And that's how it happened, Victoria concluded. Andrew ended up in the Collins family, and Mark stayed with his humble relatives. Not for long, though, Mark continued. A couple of years later, social services took all the children away from the family. By then, I was the oldest. Another girl had been born after me, so I grew up in an orphanage. I wouldn't say my childhood was very hard. We lived well, we were safe, they gave me an education. I finished college with a degree in maths and computer science. Now I'm a programmer. I have a family in London, a wife and 2 children, a flat, everything a person should have. Chloe stared at Mark, completely bewildered. What a story. It was like something out of a fairy tale. How would Andrew react to this? It was good that she had found out first. She needed to prepare him. It would be a huge shock for him. And her in-laws, they were very old now. She had to tell them gently. Chloe couldn't decide how she felt about what Andrew's parents had done. On one hand, it was immoral and illegal. On the other, her husband had grown up in royal conditions and not in an orphanage, and the childless couple had been happy to finally have a baby. "My mother used to visit me at the orphanage sometimes," Mark continued. "She must have really loved children. She just wasn't a very responsible parent. She would bring me cheap sweets and stroke my head. We weren't starving at the orphanage, but I waited for her visits and sweets like the greatest treat in the world, because it's important for every child to know that they're loved. When I grew up, I kept in touch and helped her out with money. I tried to get her to a clinic for her drinking, but she was a heavy drinker, and my father had died young from it. My mother, though, was tougher. But Mark couldn't work miracles. He could only support her and watch her decline. One day, she got seriously ill. Her liver was failing. It was no surprise. Mark visited her at the hospital and bought her the medicine she needed. But the doctors gave her no chance. Her days were numbered. The old woman knew it, and one day, she told her son, the only one of her children who hadn't abandoned her, the story of the twins. She told him about the wealthy family and the baby she had given away to the rich, childless couple. Her husband had told her the truth about it after a night of heavy drinking, explaining where he had gotten all that money from. More than 20 years had passed since then, so she wasn't particularly shocked, but she had remembered his story. She had been happy for her son, who was now living like a prince and didn't want for anything. She had even praised her husband for his decision. She had wanted to find the Collins family just to see the other twin, but the businessman and his family had moved away soon after they got the baby. Collins had sold his business, his house and his property, and had just disappeared. As I found out later, Mark said, he started a new life in a distant city, bought a different business, and settled in a new place. So here, it's just incredible. Chloe was filled with a mix of emotions: surprise, joy, anxiety, and relief. Relief that Andrew had been faithful, and here she had been making things up in her head. But what a shock her whole family was about to have. "Andrew will be happy to hear about his twin," Mark said. "He always dreamed of having a brother. It was his one wish his parents could never grant." "That's what I said when I heard my mother's story," Mark said. "She passed away the next day. If she had stayed silent, she would have taken that secret with her. But now I knew I had a twin brother and I was determined to find him no matter what. I'm still in touch with my other siblings. They all grew up to be good people with families. But my twin brother, I hired a private detective, Victoria, and she started working on the case. It wasn't hard to find the Collinses' trail. They had moved away from my family, of course, but they didn't try to cover their tracks. I found them quickly. And now we've been here for a month, he smiled. We were watching and gathering the last of the evidence just to be sure it wasn't a mistake. But the main proof is Andrew's appearance. We're practically identical. Even you, his wife, didn't realize right away. We have all the evidence now, and there are no mistakes. The next step is for the brothers to meet, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Victoria sighed. And then you came along, and it happened all by itself. Well, Chloe said with a smile, then we're all having a celebratory dinner tonight. I need to go home to prepare Andrew. I need some time. So come over at 8. You know the address, right? Of course we do, Mark beamed. Thank you for reading my story. If you enjoyed it, please like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. I'll be back with a new story soon. See you then.